Welcome back, everyone. I hope you're doing well. Today we'll be reacting to Napoleon Invades Russia. Yes, he's going to invade Russia, and I hope you're ready for it. It's going to be probably one of the most interesting videos of the Napoleonic Wars so far, just because the odds, the unsurmountable odds, Napoleon will set the stage for all the future armies that are invading Russia in the future in terms of tactical advantages versus disadvantages. The elements are going to be an extreme possibility of ruin for the armée. Now, no spoilers. This is, by the way, this is probably just like part one, because there's going to also be a retreat from Russia in the future as well. And I believe this is all due to the continental system being ignored now by Russia due to the British trade alliance, Russia. So let's just jump into it, shall we? Let's go. One must never ask more from fortune than she can grant. Ironic, eh?
Russia, 1812. Napoleon invades his former ally with the largest army Europe has ever seen. But for the French Emperor, the decisive blow remains frustratingly beyond reach. Russia's resilience is unlike anything he's ever encountered. And as winter closes in, his army begins the most infamous retreat in history. In 1807, following his defeat of the Russian army at Friedland, Napoleon had travelled to Tilsit to meet the Russian Emperor Alexander. During their celebrated encounter, the two emperors formed a friendship and made an alliance. But it was not to last. Over the next 5 years, relations between France and Russia cooled dramatically. The Russians were irritated by Napoleon's creation of a Duchy of Warsaw in Poland.
Yeah, they're kind of impeding on their borders here. Russia historically doesn't like it,
which they regarded as meddling in their own front yard. They feared it would lead to the return of a fully fledged Polish state, a traditional thorn in Russia's side. Then there was Napoleon's offer to marry Alexander's sister, Grand Duchess Anna Pavlovna, to cement their alliance. But the Romanovs hated the idea, and after a year of Russian prevarication, Napoleon married Marie-Louise, daughter of the Austrian emperor, instead.
Isn't that crazy? The two of the main coalition forces, the Austrians and the Russians, both had a potential wife. Now, not saying that the Russians wanted this, but they both had a potential wife to replace Josephine to create an heir to the throne for Napoleon's empire. Very weird, isn't it?
Later that year, Napoleon broke a guarantee made at Tilsit and annexed the Duchy of Oldenburg, ruled by Alexander's sister's father-in-law. Worst of all was the fallout over the continental system, Napoleon's not very effective economic blockade against Britain, designed to cripple his most steadfast enemy. Alexander had agreed to join the continental system at Tilsit, but it was hugely unpopular in Russia and ruinous to her finances.
All right, let's look at some of these. Russian national debt in 2 year span went up 1,300%. Exports went down 40%, meaning the trade that comes out of Russia. The value of their paper currency went down 50%, so that's inflation. And then the price of sugar and coffee rose 500%, because Great Britain, most likely with the slave trade, have a monopoly almost on the sugar and coffee industry in the Americas, in the new land, and their export for sugar and coffee was probably hugely going to places like Russia, and now that's cut off. So, you can only do so much for your friends.
During a period of economic crisis, When Napoleon found out that Russia was flouting the rules of the system and had resumed an illicit trade with Britain, he was furious. With both emperors accusing the other of bad faith, their two countries began preparing for war.
And look how far away Paris and Moscow is. That's crazy how far they are, aren't they? At Tilsit, Russia swore an eternal alliance with France. Now she breaks her oaths. Does she believe us degenerate? Are we no longer the soldiers of Austerlitz? Grande Armée.
Napoleon knew an invasion of Russia was a massive undertaking, especially as he still had an unfinished war in Spain that was tying down more than 200,000 troops. Nevertheless, in 1811, he began to assemble the largest army Europe had ever seen.
Really? Oh, yes, really. I think it's going to be 650,000 people, right?
Around 600,000 men, though less than half of them were French. The rest came from allied states across Europe.
We're gonna pause. We're gonna have every time something comes up like this, we gotta pause and kind of like see the context here. You got Napoleon, and you got the core system, of course, and you have Lefebvre, Deveau, Ordina, Ne, Nasute, and Lampron. Jerome, Polish, Saxon, Westphalian, Polish, German, so different parts of the quote-unquote French Empire. Then you have a Prussian north flank. Crazy, it's Prussian, isn't it? Then we have Eugene, which is Italian, Bavarian, so Germanicish. Then you have a reserve corps, and then you have an Austrian corps. Tons of.
There was a Polish corps from the Duchy of Warsaw, led by Prince Poniatowski. A corps from each of the German kingdoms of Saxony, Westphalia.
I didn't know he was going to go over that bad.
And Bavaria, from the Kingdom of Italy, as well as Swiss, Dutch, Croat, Spanish and Portuguese units scattered throughout the army.
Where's Westphalian? Let me know.
There were even contingents from Prussia and Austria, France's recent enemies, now uneasy allies. Some of these allied troops, such as the Poles and Germans, were as reliable as their French counterparts. Others were very inexperienced, or, like the Prussians and Austrians, reluctant to be there at all. This gigantic formation was deployed in 3 armies. The main force under Napoleon himself, another led by his stepson, Eugene, and a third led by his younger brother, Jerome, King of Westphalia. Neither of these two were experienced commanders. Though one would distinguish himself on campaign, the other would not. On their left flank, Marshal MacDonald led 10th Corps with a large Prussian contingent, while the right flank was guarded by General Schwarzenberg's Austrian Corps. Another 100,000 troops were in reserve, including Marshal Victor's 9th Corps. Initially, the Russians only had 220,000 men to face this juggernaut, organized into Barclay de Tolly's 1st Army, Prince Bagration's 2nd Army, and General Tomasov's 3rd Army. They would be outnumbered 2 to 1. But in
2 to 1, like 3 to 1.
the run-up to war, Russia scored 2 crucial diplomatic triumphs. Sweden had been at war with Russia just 3 years earlier, a conflict which cost her Finland. By a curious turn of events, Sweden was now ruled by Napoleon's ex-marshal Bernadotte. But after Napoleon occupied Swedish Pomerania without warning, a furious Bernadotte promised Russia that Sweden would remain neutral.
That's crazy. That's just crazy to me how Bernadotte. Oh, it makes sense. And isn't the Bernadotte still in like the Swedish monarchy today?
Meanwhile, a peace treaty with the Ottoman Empire ended Russia's 6-year war against its southern rival.
Because they gotta focus.
These 2 agreements secured Russia's flanks from any strategic threat. and freed up troops to face Napoleon's invasion.
Crazy. I'm about to embark on the greatest and most difficult enterprise I have ever attempted. But what has been begun must be. That's gonna parlay into stubbornness.
On the 24th of June 1812, French troops began crossing the Niemen River into Russian territory. The army was so large, the crossing took 5 days. Napoleon's plan was to attack north of the impassable Pripet marshes and defeat Barclay's army, while Jerome pinned Bagration in place. French forces would then swing south to trap Bagration. Napoleon expected the campaign to be over in 5 weeks. But the sheer size of the French army convinced the cautious Barclay that retreat was his only option. Prince Bagration, a much more aggressive commander by instinct, and often Barclay's fierce critic, was forced to agree. As they withdrew, they burned villages and crops, part of a scorched-earth strategy to deny supplies to the enemy.
Which must have been so confusing for Napoleon.
4 days, Napoleon had reached Vilnius, but Barclay was gone. To the south, Jerome failed to pin down Bagration. So when Davout's First Corps swung southeast to trap him, he'd already withdrawn to safety. Napoleon's younger brother was out of his depth. Stung by the Emperor's criticism, humiliated when his troops were put under Marshal Davout's command, he resigned his post and returned to Westphalia.
Wow.
The campaign was already beginning to expose serious flaws in Napoleon's plan. Knowing his troops would struggle to live off the land in this impoverished region, he'd organized huge supply depots and transport units to feed the army. But wagons rolled slowly along Russia's bad roads, which were turned to rivers of mud by summer thunderstorms. The army had to make frequent stops to allow its supplies to catch up. Bad news for Napoleon's plan to catch the Russians, but a much-needed relief for the many thousands of young conscripts in his army.
Yeah, and like most of these people aren't used to like the same type of speed that we've seen like in the Italian campaigns and the campaigns against Austria and such. The blitzkrieg almost feel here, but they're not utilizing that at all. They're more conservative because they have to be.
Not used to hard marches day after day. Many were soon dropping out with exhaustion. Others deserted. There were also huge problems of command and control over a vast multinational army that was 3 times bigger than any Napoleon had commanded before. La Grande Armée, once famed for its speed of maneuver, had become a lumbering beast. After a pause to rest and regroup at Vilnius, Napoleon resumed his advance. Barclay continued his retreat to Vitebsk, where he hoped Bagration's Second Army would be able to join him. But Davout blocked Bagration's path at Sultanovka, forcing him to make for Smolensk instead. At Vitebsk,
Like Russia does not want to fight at all.
Napoleon clashed with Barclay's rearguard, but once more the Russians escaped, after setting fire to all the stores they couldn't take with them. Meanwhile, 300 miles away, on Napoleon's southern flank, Russian Third Army attacked and defeated the Saxon 7th Corps, forcing Napoleon to divert Schwarzenberg's Austrian Corps to their aid.
With the flank protection.
By the end of July, Napoleon had advanced 250 miles into Russia, much further than he'd planned.
Really?
And the long marches in extreme summer heat continued to take a heavy toll on his men. Without fighting a major battle, the army had already suffered 20% casualties.
20%? 100,000? 150,000? 120,000. But that also, casualties, you gotta think about that. Casualties just doesn't just death. It means sickness, it means desertion, it means captures, but mostly desertion, sickness, etc.
From exhaustion and illness, particularly typhus and dysentery. The army had entered Russia with 250,000 horses, but they were now dying at a rate of 1,000 every day.
My God, and they're probably gonna eat the horses too.
From exhaustion and lack of fodder. It wasn't just cavalry horses that were dying, but the very horses that were supposed to haul the army's transport wagons, making a bad situation worse.
Crazy.
This crisis in horsepower came just as the French light cavalry, Napoleon's eyes and ears, met their match in Russia's Cossacks.
Which is their specialty cavalry version. If Napoleon had Cossacks in his army, he would have been Emperor of China long ago.
Cossacks, self-reliant, proud, ruthless, and superb horsemen, didn't play by the same rules as other European cavalry.
What do you mean?
Every day they shadowed Napoleon's army, swooping in whenever they saw an easy target, but melting away into the forests if they were attacked by a stronger force. Cossacks, as well as Russian partisans, made hit-and-run attacks on French supply lines and depots, forcing Napoleon to divert thousands of troops to their defense.
It's just like Spain with the guerrillas, where they had to have like a, 200 cavalry units protecting every single supply line.
Alongside Russian regular light cavalry, they also prevented French patrols from carrying out reconnaissance, which meant that Napoleon often lacked good information about roads or the enemy's whereabouts. Napoleon stayed 16 days at Vitebsk, resting his troops and considering his options. Among his many mounting concerns was the security of his long, exposed flanks. But at Vitebsk, he received news that Schwarzenberg had defeated the Russians at Borodino.
Okay.
A week later at Polotsk, a French Bavarian force fought Wittgenstein's Russian First Corps to a standstill. Napoleon's flanks were secure, for now. Although his main force had been reduced to less than half its original strength, Napoleon decided to push on to Smolensk and try to force the Russians into a decisive battle for the city. Barclay was indeed under pressure to give battle from fellow commander Prince Bagration and Emperor Alexander in St. Petersburg. The army's morale and Russia's honor required it, they told him.
Okay, here we go.
With the First and Second Russian armies finally linking up near Smolensk, Barclay decided to attack Napoleon's army, which he believed was concentrated around Rudnya. The offensive was led by General Platov's Cossacks, who surprised a French cavalry division at Inkovo. But alarmed by false reports that Eugene's Fourth Corps was outflanking him to the north, Barclay called off the attack. Napoleon, reassured that Barclay's offensive posed no real threat, began a grand outflanking move to the south to take Smolensk and cut off the Russian retreat. The so-called Smolensk maneuver was Napoleon at his best, using Murat's cavalry to screen his movements and keep Barclay in the
That is so smart. Oh my goodness.
dark. The Emperor reached the Dnieper on the evening of the 13th of August. His engineers quickly threw up 4 pontoon bridges, and by dawn the next day, his army was across. Marshal Davout led a second column across the river at Orsha. But a single Russian division, the 27th, fought a heroic fighting retreat from Krasny, delaying the French advance and buying time for Bagration to reinforce the Smolensk garrison. The chance for a surprise assault on the city was lost.
That's crazy.
And as the Russian army began to pull back, Napoleon displayed an uncharacteristic lack of urgency, even halting the army for a parade to mark his 43rd birthday.
That's... Oh my goodness. I don't even know what to say about that.
When the main attack on Smolensk began 2 days later, Napoleon opted for a frontal assault. 150 French guns battered the city as 3 French corps attacked its medieval fortifications. The Russians resisted bravely, but Barclay, fearing encirclement, ordered another retreat.
That's what they do, they retreat.
With Smolensk in flames, the Russians began to pull out. Just as the French fought their way into the city, to scenes of utter devastation. Bagration's Second Army withdrew first. As Barclay's army followed, its rearguard was caught by Ney's Third Corps at Valutino. General Junot, commanding the Westphalian 8th Corps, had orders to cut off Barclay's retreat. But having crossed the river, he did nothing, and the opportunity was lost.
So much like sitting on your hands moments here. So much conservativeness from the Napoleon army. And you gotta think, like, who's at fault here?
Furious Napoleon swore that Junot would never now win his marshal's baton.
There goes his morale.
Battle of Smolensk cost both sides around 10,000 casualties and destroyed one of Russia's most historic and holy cities, but settled nothing.
Before a month's out, we shall be in Moscow. In 6 weeks, we should have peace. Very optimistic. 6 weeks.
After the missed chance to defeat the Russians at Smolensk, Napoleon paused once more to consider his options. His men were weary and far from home, and it was already late in the campaigning season. He considered sitting out the Russian winter at Smolensk and resuming the campaign in 1813. But now he was just 230 miles from Moscow. A century earlier, Peter the Great had moved Russia's capital to St. Petersburg, but Moscow remained its historic and spiritual heart, a prize for which the Russians had to fight. Napoleon, always a gambler, decided to push on. The Russians faced their own dilemma. Emperor Alexander had experienced a kind of religious epiphany that summer and rallied the Russian people to the country's defense, describing the war with Napoleon as a war to save Holy Mother Russia from the Antichrist.
And a lot of people believed Napoleon was the Antichrist. This is not just a one-off sense. I believe it was just, and we saw this in Spain too, I believe it's just due to, like, you know, a lot of these, this country of France was born out of the revolution, and it was pretty much going against everything that was traditional. Everything, completely, including religion. Now, I'm sure there's so many conscripts and so many officers and whatnot that are still religious in the French army, but like as an ideology, as the French Empire, it's not built in religion. It's built out of built out. I would almost say out of atheism.
For months, the emperor had received conflicting advice to stand and fight or retreat. Now he decided change was needed. The cautious General Barclay kept his job, but the emperor summoned General Mikhail Kutuzov to take overall command of Russia's armies. Kutuzov had been beaten by Napoleon at Austerlitz 7 years before, but he'd since won several victories against the Ottoman Empire and was a true Russian, loved by the troops. Although Kutuzov agreed with Barclay's strategy of delay, he saw that constant retreats were destroying the soldiers' and the nation's morale. If Moscow was given up without a battle, the fallout could be disastrous. And so, 70 miles west of the city, near the village of Borodino, the Russian army prepared to make a stand. Europe was about to witness the bloodiest day's fighting of the Napoleonic Wars.
This image is crazy. You have the white horse, everything. Ah, are you guys ready? I'm so ready. I can't wait. That's it, right? Yeah, that's it. That's it. I don't know what to say besides like, it seems like it's just the Russian wilderness is so vast. It's just so hard to like get a win because it's just so vast and it's hard to make ground. So it's so easy to retreat and go here, especially like the Cossacks and the different armies with the different rivers and how they can just retreat and go into the wilderness and then just move place to place. Also, tangent. If anyone knows, why did Peter the Great move the capital from Moscow to St. Petersburg? Interested. Strategically, St. Petersburg is on the water. Let me know. But we have more videos to come. Hope you're ready for them. Hit that subscribe button. Hit that like button. I appreciate every single one of you. Let's keep going. I'll see you guys next time. Peace out. Bye-bye.